grows up on the poor side of Chicago, the son of Jewish Rabbi Elias Spector, who escapes Hitler's regime once it reaches Czechoslovakia. Mark is shocked when his father comes home one day bearing a swastika cruelly carved into his forehead. The young boy refuses to accept his father's failure to fight back, developing a chip on his shoulder regarding bullies and oppressors. Displaying aggressive tendencies, Mark takes up boxing and is confronted by his father after a fight. In a stunning rebuke, Mark actually downs his father right there in the ring in front of hundreds of people. This is such a stunning moment that I honestly gasped when I turned to the panel. Mark's early days not only instill within readers his sense of morality, but the significance of his heritage. Being a Jewish hero allows writers to examine the unfortunate topic of anti-Semitism through MoonKnight, contributing to the idea that every group of people should have a superhero to look up to. Now, perhaps MoonKnight's signature trait is his dissociative identity disorder, the mental illness that leads to his multiple personalities. The development of this disorder stems from an event in his childhood involving a family friend. Rabbi Yitz Perlman, a figure Mark considers an uncle, is secretly the former Nazi soldier and serial killer Ernst. Responsible for the creation of such horrible figures as Red Skull and Hatemonger, Ernst fled Germany once he surmised that Hitler's end was near and settled in Chicago. His synagogue had a secret room for his devilish deeds, and he is committing his crimes there one day when Mark stumbles upon the scene. The young Spectre escapes, but not before Ernst promises to return if the child ever gives up his secret. In a chilling move, Ernst vanishes afterward and is not heard from again, not even by his closest of friends. Understandably, young Mark is traumatized by this and is thus set upon his path of living with DID. Following Ernst's disappearance, Mark meets Khonshu, the ancient Egyptian god of the moon and Mark's future master, for the very first time in his life. The deity professes to be Mark's true creator and parent, foreshadowing momentous events to come in the young man's life. He is entered into the Putnam Psychiatric Hospital by his father, but is only there a little while before the latter passes away. When given permission to attend his father's funeral, Mark takes the opportunity to escape at the behest of Khonshu. With a myriad of differences between them, as well as the emerging father figure in Khonshu, Mark resents his father Elias heavily. Also, it should not be lost on readers the symbolic nature of Mark embracing his new father's direction whilst attending his old father's funeral. Khonshu is the birth of a new Mark Spector. He enlists in the Marines, along with his brother Randall, and they serve 3 years before Mark is dishonorably discharged due to his mental illness. After a brief stint with the CIA, he naturally moves into mercenary work, along with a friend he meets in an illegal fighting ring, Frenchie Duchamp, as well as, again, his brother Randall. Their gun-for-hire work sends them globe-trotting to places like South America, Africa, and Europe. During an operation in Italy, Randall actually betrays Mark and murders Lisa Maloney, the woman Mark loves. Once again demonstrating his relatable but undeniably vengeful tendencies, Mark hunts down and seemingly kills his brother with a well-placed grenade. Continuing his run of bad luck with associates, Mark and Frenchie meet Raoul Bushman while in Egypt. Escorting an archaeological team in Sudan, Bushman massacres the majority of them and fatally wounds Mark after he stands up for Marlene Alrane, the daughter of one of the scientists. Mark is left for dead in the desert but manages to crawl to the tomb despite his injury, reaching Marlene and Frenchie even as he starts to grow weaker. His friends place him at the base of a Khonshu statue, prompting a spiritual interface between Mark and the deity. Khonshu proposes a resurrection, granted Mark serves the moon god. He is then restored to life and wipes out Bushman's remaining men while their leader slips away. While accepting the deal and being revived, Mark would consider his encounter with Khonshu a mere hallucination, which is not an uncommon thing for a dying man. What is uncommon are Mark's abilities upon being resurrected. The deity strengthens the capacity of Mark's mind, granting him resistance to telepathic attacks. Foreshadowed by his revival and reaffirmed repeatedly throughout his life, Mark is also given immortality thanks to Khonshu. Sadly, Mark Spector meets his end several times throughout his life, but the power of Khonshu always proves too much for even the forces of death. These abilities, combined with Mark's special ops training and mercenary experience, endow Khonshu's champion with unfathomable potential. After his rather tumultuous time in Africa, Mark returns to New York with Frenchie and Marlene and begins his vigilantism as MoonKnight. And it is here that we begin to see Mark conceptualize and utilize his multiple personalities to facilitate his superhero activities. When Mark returns to New York, he employs the Stephen Grant financer identity to pay for his vigilante activities. In an indelibly clever move, Mark's Jake Lockley identity takes the role of an informant for MoonKnight as he cruises the streets of New York in his taxi cab. However, with Grant, Lockley, and MoonKnight all taking up space in his head, the original identity of Mark Spector begins to fade into the recesses of his mind. He tracks down Bushman, but the villain employs another foe, Midnight Man, to shatter shatter Spectre's Khonshu idol. Mark's tenuous grasp on his identity spirals out of control. Marlene, now Mark's girlfriend, gives him a fake idol but claims it is real out of desperation for her lover's well-being. Quite frankly, I can't say I wouldn't do the same if I were in her place. Seeing a loved one suffer is agonizing, and for a time, Marlene is spared this when Mark buys it as the real deal. After this brush with disaster, MoonKnight faced two more foes that would stay in his orbit for a long time. Morpheus, a physically enhanced patient of Marlene's brother, and Black Spectre, a candidate for mayor named Carson Knowles. Aside from his handful of foes, MoonKnight would not receive a substantial assignment until he is approached by a group of businessmen known as the Committee. They are seeking the capture of Jack Russell, better known as Werewolf, and Spectre obliges with relative ease, given his core susceptibility to silver. MoonKnight equips his silver cestus, a part of his gloves with knuckle tips added, and subdues the fearsome creature. However, the Committee actually plans to transform Russell's sister, Lissa, into a werewolf as well, and deploy them as weapons. In his first published appearance in Marvel Comics, MoonKnight demonstrates his character by instead freeing Jack and helping him take down the Committee. And at this point, you may be beginning to see the tonal trend in MoonKnight's stories. They tend to be rather adult and horror tinged as opposed to more mainstream characters like the Incredible Hulk or Spider-Man. Speaking of which, yeah, despite his more antisocial tendencies, MoonKnight does carry out justice with others from time to time. He works with Hulk during their brief partnership with the Defenders, where they battle a couple of life model decoys of the Zodiac, a cartel focused on, you guessed it, world domination. Other members he works with here include Clea, Hellcat, and Valkyrie, which all in all makes for a particularly formidable Defenders roster. Not to mention, largely female, which is impressive given it was released in the 70s. Another lovely reminder that Marvel Comics was working to move the genre forward in terms of representation even back then. MoonKnight then collaborates with Spider-Man to take down Cyclone, who is actually employed by the Masked Marauder. However, the heroes start off on a bad note as Spidey mistakes MoonKnight for a villain, largely due to Mark's violent tendencies showing themselves with a mob lackey. After a brief scuffle, the two move past their initial misgivings with each other and work well enough together to subdue Cyclone, though they are unable to capture the Marauder. This is the heroes' first meeting in the comics and certainly works in contrast to two differing habits and ideologies. For example, MoonKnight uses his Jake Lockley and Stephen Grant personalities in the comic, something that I cannot imagine Peter ever forgetting. It begs the question, how do heroes work ethically with MoonKnight knowing his instabilities? And perhaps this is one of the questions the many writers of MoonKnight want us to wrestle with. When does Mark Spector go from hero to victim? And how does one operate when both reside in the same person?
Reveal how food, exercise,
MoonKnight returns to the solo act with an investigation into a killer dubbed the Hatchet Man. Suspecting it to be his presumed dead brother Randall, Mark reluctantly uses Marlene as bait to lure the killer out into Central Park. The authorities show up though and spook the Hatchet Man, who takes Marlene hostage. In a ploy to escape, the killer hatchets Marlene and sends Mark's memory spiraling back to the murder of Lisa Maloney at the hands of Randall. Understandably enraged, MoonKnight follows Hatchet Man and saves another hostage from his grasp. After a brief fight, Mark's demons are apparently put to rest when Hatchet Man is impaled on a tree branch. Yeah, you heard that right. I'm assuming he did it by accident. Marlene's fate, however, is left more up in the air as she recovers in the hospital. Marlene recovers and life returns to normal for Mark Spector, or at least what passes for normal in his case. Then, a truly macabre occurrence in the form of the corpse of Amos Lardner, an associate of Spector's from the CIA days, arrives in a box on his doorstep. Turns out it's a message from the Company, an organization that has taken Marlene hostage in Paris and is seeking to wipe out Spector thanks to his knowledge of Operation Cobra, an agent of